Good evening. Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next installment of the Observation Post Facebook Live broadcast for the 3rd of August 2023. Now, kind of feeling tired. Didn't bother to shave. I was going to post these points I was going to talk about tonight early for a change, and I elaborated on them. I had more of a script for a change. Now, I'll still read from it as if, that's what I had planned to do, but I forgot to post them or didn't bother to post them. However, I also will talk about some recent contact attempts that I've done. I spoke to the Canadian Forces Ombudsman today. A staff person there. I'll explain that a bit. And I'll talk about a letter I discovered recently. I've always talked about, repeated myself about the fact that Canada Pension Plan sent me a letter on the 26th of July 2013, and they said that I shouldn't get it. Well, I recently found a follow-up letter, so I'll get into that later. So first of all, this one's kind of important even though I didn't post it. Point number 308 in my numbered list, which you can find in my files section of my group. A 2019 Veterans Affairs Canada Case Management report stated that many veterans died while in rehab. As I see it, the government should not kill those who served in war or training for war after they became disabled in military service. Harsh words, but why did 758, an average of 159 per year, die while under Veterans Affairs Canada's care? Were their deaths natural? Suicide. We could compare the mortality of the disabled to the healthy Canadian Forces veteran fairly easily by using the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act actuarial report and or the Canada Pension Plan reports. If the number of veterans who die during rehab is higher than normal, then it should cease immediately until they prove that this program is not harmful. I think it's a no-brainer. Now, I've said this so many times it's unreal, but why did this get reported in a footnote, in a report about case management? Why hasn't the media seized upon this as a scandal? Like, Veterans Affairs Canada should not be even close to killing its clients. Point number 309. Canada has a legal duty to report on potential liability. As I recall, they have to sign a grade of low, medium, and high probability that the government will have to pay compensation to someone to make them whole. For example, this could have happened in a Manuge Federal Court 2012 case, and the government did indeed publish widely varied amounts that they said will be owing. To me, this proves that they are incompetent, as the first attempts were nowhere close to the real cost. An example closer to me would be the double dip and the triple dip clawback that myself and Shawn Careen warned the government about in August of 2018. Now, myself and Shawn went over to the Minister of Veterans Affairs, Seamus O'Regan's office at the time, and he was also the Associate Minister of National Defense, so we figured we'd kill two birds with one stone, and we told them about this possible liability that the government would have, and it would have to pay thousands of disabled veterans back the money that they took into account at more than one department and ended up harming the veteran. So they didn't do anything about it. Now, I'll probably talk about that again when I get into other stuff. Because let me get up my Facebook account and I'll look at what notes I made about the fact that I called the Canadian Forces Ombudsman, and I'll discuss that first. Okay? So, I got to skim down a bit because today I was a bit triggered and I posted a bunch. Now, I don't post them on my own account, which would notify people. I post them to my observation post group, where I do not have notifications enabled. At least I think I don't have it enabled. So I don't want to bug people. Okay. Christ, all these posts. See, I post pictures as well, and I put a comment by them usually. So that means I'm going down through here, and it's a bit tough to get exactly where I want to before I was meaning to talk. Okay, here's my post that I did it 7 hours ago. Now, I had a pretty good conversation with a brand new employee at the Canadian Forces Ombudsman. I'm just glad that those bastards don't hang up on me. So I said, 22-minute call to the Canadian Forces Ombudsman, spoke to a new employee who had worked there for 3 weeks and discussed the following. Number one, I suggest that the Canadian Forces Ombudsman consider following up on the 2003 unfair deductions report to see if disabled public servants in receipt of the Sun Life, I said Dun Life, I didn't notice the typo, and spell check didn't pick it up because done is a word. Policy 12,500G had the same Pension Act pension clawback that the CFSA veterans had. Many disabled veterans have and do work as public servants, so they would not get the Service Income Support Insurance Plan if their disability worsened over time. So if they left the military and they were getting a Pension Act pension, because you could get a Pension Act pension and work after 2000. Now, or you could, that's as a soldier. Maybe they were injured and worked as a public servant much earlier, because rehabilitation after World War II, they would want disabled people to work for the federal government, so they were public servants. Now, if you had a disability and you could work, and then later the disability got worse, well, you wouldn't end up on the Army's long-term disability, you'd end up on the Treasury Board's disability insurance. Now, if you get in the Pension Act pension, there is a possibility, or maybe a probability, that they took that into account to save the Treasury Board's long-term disability insurance money. The Canadian Forces Ombudsman sort of glossed it over. And I said to the guy I spoke to, don't take this too wrong, of course. I mean, a new person might or might not. But I said, you know, your whole report was wrong, because the unfair deduction, you compared a soldier to a veteran. Now, the soldier served and got paid, and they said it was unfair for them to get the Pension Act pension in addition, because it looks like a bonus to most people. But that's just the way it works if you're still able to work and you're disabled. You don't make a person quit their job. Normally, if they can still perform it, you pay them a permanent partial disability award under the workers' compensation system, and they keep working. So the premise that a disabled veteran who lost their Pension Act pension value from their Service Income Support Insurance Plan, and they compared that to a soldier who got both with no clawback, was false. They should not have done it ever. I'm not saying that it was right to claw back it from the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, because there are many, many reasons that I've expounded on in the past that they cannot do it. And first and foremost is that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, Policy 901-102, is a non-indemnity and contributory insurance payment which does not own the right to claw back. So because it doesn't own the right to claw back, they can't put it into the contract and pretend that they had the right to include it in the contract. They just can't. Now, let me see what they said in paragraph 46 of the report, because I posted it in the pictures. It says that the level of benefits on the Sun Life insurance policy is 70% adjusted annual salary. Deductions are made for amounts received for the same disability from benefit plans and pensions such as Canada Pension Plan or the Public Service Superannuation Act or Provincial Workers' Compensation. Treasury Board advised my office. Now, that was one of the things I told the worker that was wrong. They should have done a neutral and thorough investigation and just not ask questions to Treasury Board and accepted their answers as gospel. You don't do a good report that way. So they said that Treasury Board advised my office that if the insured received benefits under the Pension Act for a deterioration of an illness or condition that leads them to claim public service disability insurance benefits, any resulting increase in the Pension Act benefit would be deducted from the public service disability insurance benefits. Now, I find that confusing. Are they talking about the cost of living increase on the Pension Act? Or are they talking about a table of disabilities increase for the disability that caused the pension? I don't know what they meant, because it's all garbage. They can't do it. Pension Act Section 30 forbids anyone from taking into account the compensation that's supposed to make a disabled military veteran whole. So it says the amount that the insurer was receiving under the Pension Act before the condition deteriorated would not be deducted. Any benefits received under the Pension Act for an unrelated illness or injury would also not be deducted. Now, this is a common thread I've seen where, like, workers' compensation will say, for example, that we take into account the count of the pension plan disability if you got the workers' compensation and the count of the pension plan disability for the same condition. Now, that implies that they will not touch it if you have a separate condition, but, excuse me while I burp, the count of the pension plan disability is not paid based on condition. That's the main problem. So in the Sarbanes Supreme Court Canada case in 2002, they said that the count of the pension plan disability is basically paid on the basis of an insurance claim. You insure against a risk. The risk is disability that causes you to be unable to work. Now, if you become disabled, then you get the insurance. As a matter of fact, that's not how the Canada Pension Plan Disability works. They routinely deny people that should get the insurance, but they don't get it. So basically, they put a very strict definition in place because they don't want to pay people out of the Canada Pension Plan, and that's screwing people over who became disabled. But they seem to think that that's okay. Now, don't know if this is a problem, by the way. I want them to investigate it to see if it really is a problem, because there were two fixes for the Pension Act clawbacks. There was the RCMP, Great West Life Butte Estate case, which Great West Life was not sued, Canada was sued. And there was the Service Income Support Insurance Plan lawsuit with Dennis Manuge that ended with a win, but it wasn't Manulife who got sued and lost the case. It was the Government of Canada. So the other two insurances did not get sued. Sun Life Policy 12,500G and the Public Service Management Insurance Plan. Point number 2. I warned him that the Canadian Forces Ombudsman might not like this point. I've already talked about this, but I mentioned was incompetently done. What I mean is there was nothing wrong with getting some compensation for injury plus pay if you can still serve. So the entire premise was wrong as they compared serving soldiers getting a pension as having a bonus as compared to veterans in receipt of CFSA having a clawback. So the Canadian Forces Ombudsman judged that as unfair when it was fair and legal for the soldier to get both. Don't get me wrong, CFSA clawing back an indemnity for an injury that is supposed to make a disabled veteran whole is still horrendous. Just not for a real reason, not an invented and incorrect one. So I'll elaborate on that point one bit. Under the Pension Act, if you get the pension for the same event, not condition, that causes you to get the pension if you get a lawsuit in tort or workers' compensation for the exact same injury that is caused by the event, then they will claw back the value under Pension Act Section 25. Now, in the Manuge class action lawsuit, they said that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan was an indemnity for lost income. If that judge was right, which he's not, then Pension Act Section 25 would apply, and instead of CFSA clawing back the pension, then the pension would have clawed back CFSA because they're both an indemnity. You see? So they're full of shit, okay? They're just making stuff up. Okay, number 3. I asked if they could do joint investigations with the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman, citing the program arrangement and the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman 2013 report, where earnings loss benefit and CFSA were used interchangeably as my reason for cooperation between these two agencies. Now, if you look at it, there was no Office of the Veterans Ombudsman in 2003. And the report that the Canadian Forces Ombudsman did was about veterans, not serving soldiers. So really it's pretty hard to separate a veteran and a soldier, and they probably shouldn't have two different ombudsmen. I don't think it's necessary. They could probably combine them into one and save some money, because there are so many similar topics, and most soldiers probably don't complain to the Canadian Forces Ombudsman because they probably wouldn't even bother. I think they just want to be tough and they'd ignore an ombudsman. Number 4, I asked if the Canadian Forces Ombudsman could invest the economics of clawbacks, as I think they are harmful to Canadian society. A, less money to spend for the disabled veteran. B, less taxes for the government on sales. When people buy things, they pay sales tax. C, less taxes, less income taxes, for workers who sell products or services to disabled veterans. D, while the government saves in the short run on clawbacks, they will get cut one day, so they are merely kicking the can down the road, like in the Manuge Federal Court 2012 case showed. The government saving on long-term disability expenses are not the only factor. I suggest that the OAG, the Office of the Auditor General, or the Parliamentary Budget Office as a possible source that they can consult with. So they should get some expert opinions about, are clawbacks good for Canadian society, or are clawbacks bad for Canadian society? Nobody seems to have ever looked at that. It's kind of insane in my opinion. Point number 5. I told them about the deception used in claiming that Manulife is the insurer or underwriter, and I asked the Canadian Forces Ombudsman to look into this, as it's important that the government not lie to the public. Look, we got to trust the government that we elect. To gain our trust, they must not lie. It's that simple. So they have set up an insurance plan where Manulife appears to be the insurer, but actually it's the Government of Canada, and Manulife merely administers the policy for the Government of Canada. Now, to me, that's right there. They're guilty of fraud, because you're not supposed to use deceit or deception to put people's economic interest at risk. That's the definition of criminal fraud from the Olan Supreme Court of Canada case in 1979. It's not only civil matters that I look up case law on. I've looked up criminal matters as well. So number 6. Now, on that point, I told them about, back in 6 or 7 years ago, I called the Canadian Forces Ombudsman, and they told me that Manulife was the underwriter, and I said that was insane, and ended up causing a fight. I said, do a proper investigation this time. Number 6, I also mentioned that medical exams being used to make disabled veterans reapply for CSIP each year. So, the way the CSIP program is set up on paper is that you get medical release. Ever since 1999, you get automatic long-term disability insurance. At the 2-year mark, 18 months to 2-year mark, they have to make a determination, are you going to get the insurance past the first 2 years until you turn age 65. I'd say 99.9% of the people on it get kicked off at 2 years. Prove that I'm wrong, government. Tell us what the figures are. Now, ordinarily in any other insurance plan, the figure is supposed to be 16% or thereabouts. So, if you had 100 people that were brought into the insurance plan, 16 people will be left after 2 years. I don't think 16% is an accurate projection for what the Army's long-term disability insurance does. Anyway, once approved past 24 months, there should be no more medical examinations unless there is evidence that the veteran is no longer disabled. It occurs to me that this could come from Veterans Affairs Canada, maybe due to the income replacement benefit / CSIP integration, right? Now, it could also come from T4 slips, because anybody who can work, you would expect them to go and earn a living. Okay? So they think, this is plain as the day. They think people are lying to get payments for nothing. That's what they think. So they put all of these measures in place to try to ensure that we don't defraud the government of Canada. But it's not a welfare program. The long-term disability insurance, you're supposed to get the insurance that you bought and paid for. Okay? The Canada Pension Plan, you paid contributions into that, and therefore you should get it if you become disabled, because that was the process they set up in 1966. The Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension is a rare pension for the federal government in that it has a 3B disability definition. Now, in military terms, under the Queen's Regulation and Orders 15.01, 3B is you're too disabled to do your own trade. 3A, on the other hand, is the same thing as the Canada Pension Plan and the Public Service Superannuation Act and the RCMP Superannuation Act and the Reserve Force Pension Plan definition of disability, and you had to be too disabled to do any job. Now, the ones getting it right is the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. If you become disabled too much to not be able to do your own trade, then you should get your pension. So the public service pension is doing it wrong. They want you to be too disabled to do somebody else's job before they'll give you your pension, which is insane. The Canada Pension Plan should operate the same way, and the RCMP and the Reserve Force Pension Plan. Anyway, but the thing is that the way I look at this is they make you reapply for the insurance every year, because they make you do an annual medical. You got to go to the doctor, fill out a 4-page bit of paperwork, send it back, and I think Manulife must get paid by the hour or something, because they don't want us just getting the insurance until age 65 and leaving us alone. Now, Sun Life, because I get Sun Life, and I still get that, my Manulife through the CFSA program, I got cut off in 2017. Now, I hope to get that back one of these days, because it's not fair that I don't get it, because they approved me in 2014 until I turned age 65. Now I'm 57 now. So why did they cut me off just to save money and are getting away with it? Now, the Sun Life policy, they asked me to fill out a 1-page form. I just got to sign that I'm still disabled, and then my payments keep continuing. Now, while I'm doing this, I'll look at the pictures, because I included, I hope I did anyway, a hint about this, because it's stated, paragraph 22 in the affidavit of settlement between the government and the class action between Dennis Manuge. Paragraph 22 says the defendant, which is Canada, shall retain its usual rights under the CFSA Policy 901-102 in relation to the provision of or requests for a medical or financial evidence for future payments other than the refund. Now, let me break that down here. They put the word usual in there, I think, to imply that this is a normal practice and therefore there's nothing wrong with this. That's my take on it. And they say it's a right. It's not a right. It's only a right if you, in a contract, if you sat down and negotiated and you gave up the right and you signed your John Hancock on it, then you would have given them the right to demand it because you gave it to them voluntarily. That doesn't happen in this case. And then it says, in relation to the provisions for requests for medicals. Now, medical evidence for future payments. They're saying, unless you prove to us that you're still disabled, you're not getting any future payments. That's not how insurance is supposed to work. After they do that second exam, they do the, I don't even know if they do a first exam, because, you get it automatically normally. But at the 18 to 24 month mark, they make you get a medical. Now, if the medical says that you are 3A disabled, you continue to get CFSA. And it's supposed to last until age 65. Now, I did put a picture of, when I was skipping to this one to get to that, it was from a Mercer report that the government gets these Mercer reports that the company called Mercer does an audit of the Service Income Support Insurance Plan and makes recommendations to the government. And in this little Venn diagram where they intersect little bubbles showing the stages of your claim, they say age 65 if totally disabled. Now that's the Service Income Support Insurance Plan's definition for 3A. You can't work at any job, therefore you get the insurance until age 65. Now this is put out in their publication, so there is no way that they can justify, and some people might recall how warrant officer, I'm trying to remember his rank, Franklin. He was over in Kabul, got blown up by a suicide bomber, lost 2 legs. Paul Franklin. So he's getting a Service Income Support Insurance Plan ever since. He made the news a couple of years in a row because the government was asking him to see the doctor for these medical exams. And I don't know if it was me because I was corresponding with him at the time. I might have put the idea, or he came up on his own about what are they wanting me to do? Prove that my legs grew back like a newt or a frog or something. And it was in the news. And Minister Sajan at the time said, oh, we only do this reports, these medical exams to make sure that we're serving the veteran in the best possible way. You know, words to that effect. I call bullshit on that because the affidavit that I just read proves that they only do it to see if you're still disabled. So he's lying. Just like any other politician. But the thing is, he might actually believe his lies. Now, let me go back and cancel out these pictures and go back to my points because I'm almost finished these points. Point number 7 in my notes, and I hope I remember them all because I don't write down things, I just do it from memory after. He said he would email me for more detail. I did advise him of a failed report on Manuge for all years ago that pissed me off. So it was so incompetent, as it ignored the Manuge Federal Court 2012 case judge, because the judge said that Manuge was in effect a stranger to the policy. Now that's a legal term about contract law, because in contract law only the parties to the contract can get sued in law in a court or be sued. You can sue and be sued if you're a party to the contract. However, a stranger to the policy has no standing in the contract. So if they put a lawsuit in on a contract that they're not part of, it will be thrown out because they are a stranger to the contract and have no standing before the court. Now, if Manuge was really the insurance provider or the underwriter, and they took the premiums and accepted the risk of having to pay, then Dennis Manuge would have sued the Manuge and not the government of Canada, and the government of Canada would have sat back and watched and said, that's your problem, buddy, not mine. So I said, where Manuge was not sued, nor did it sign the 2006 program arrangement. Now, I threw that in there at the last second, but the thing is, it seems to me that they're up to something no good. I could speculate all day. I don't know what their angle is. I don't know what Manuge's agenda really is. One thing I think it is has to do with the Canada Pension Plan Disability. Because Section 65.3 of the Canada Pension Plan Act allows the Canada Pension Plan to send a direct payment to a disability insurance administrator. The word in the Act doesn't say insurer. It says administrator. Now, I think the insurance companies of Canada lobbied for that word to be inserted into the Act. Because if anybody ever says it, then listen, you didn't take any profit or loss risk here. You're not the underwriter. You're merely the administrator of the insurance policy. They'll say, well, the law says administrator. So when the payment comes to us, nothing's being done illegally. Yeah, give me a fucking break if they try to say that. if anybody is allowed to get the money, it ought to be the one who took the risk of profit or loss. But I said if for a reason, because pensions, according to the Income Tax Act regulations, cannot be paid to anybody but the pensioner. Okay? So the person who contributes to the pension, they don't own it legally, they own it equitably. Okay? Because there's two types of law that I know of, at least two types. Legal law, and equity law. So somebody has to own the money, so that would be the employer or the trustee or whoever is assigned to administer the funds. But the people who contribute the money to the pension equitably own the pension. So in my case, and in your case, I presume, you paid into the Canadian Forces or the Public Service or a private pension plan. That money is your money. It was earned at the time that you served, and it was put into the bank for you. And that's why it's property. It's not money, income. It was income in the past, but it was put into the bank. So that makes it property. Now, this is not just me. I'm quoting off the Clark versus Clark Supreme Court of Canada 1990 case. And it happened to be about the Canadian Forces Superannuation pension. And the issue at trial is this pension income or property? And it wasn't income. It was decided that it was property. At the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, they said it was income. And at the Supreme Court of Canada, they overruled the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal, and they said, you are wrong. And they said pensions are property. So, this is all bullshit, right? You shouldn't be taking people's property, calling it income, just because you want to put everything under the term income so you can try to justify that you're clawing it back. I mean, it just ain't right. Now, I'm really dried out and my eyes are blurry, so I'll mention one other thing, and let me see if I put the letter. Okay. I forgot about this. I didn't open up 26 July 2013 letter for 3 years, so maybe it's the same thing here. But, evidently, I sent a request to them. Again, that don't ring any bells, except they put it in writing in their reply back to me. They said, Dear Mr. Edwards, CPP disability decision. This is further to your request received on the 25th of October 2013 that we reconsider the decision to deny you disability benefits. So obviously, I told them they were wrong, and I asked them to reconsider. I didn't put in an appeal, but I figured a reconsideration was the appropriate measure. We regret to inform you that the Canada Pension Plan still cannot pay you benefits. A careful review of your application shows that you do not meet the Canada Pension Plan disability rules. Now, so basically, they reiterated, reinforced, backed up their previous decision from the 26th of July 2013. And that's normal for the government, because they hardly ever say we were wrong and therefore we're going to fix it and change it. Now, the reason I'm waxing on and harping on this so much is that not only do I have a letter from the 26th of July 2013 where they said I shouldn't have got it, but they followed it up with a second letter. So they put it in writing twice. Now, people might say, what are you getting on about that? Well, this was the 31st of March 2014, and not much longer. April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. 8 months later, I got approved after 2 fucking letters telling me that I couldn't get it. Now, people might say, what are you complaining about? What are you cursing and swearing about getting discounted the pension plan? Aren't you happy they made a mistake? No, I'm not. It caused nothing but shit and abuse getting the Canada Pension Plan disability. My public service pension took it into account and reduced my payment because of alleged bridging payments. My reserve force pension plan took it into account and reduced my pension. Now remember, pensions are property. I shouldn't have one get reduced because I had another pension property. Go fuck yourself. Then my Sun Life insurance went down. In fact, they estimated my Canada Pension Plan disability at maximum rate around the same time that CPP told me no. So if I had had that letter there opened at the same time that Sun Life said, you're not playing ball with us, you're not applying for the Canada Pension Plan disability like we said, I'd have sent this letter back and I'd have said, stick this up your fucking arse, because here's my recent letter telling me that I cannot get Canada Pension Plan disability, so you stop this estimation at once, you fucking prick. But I never opened it, obviously. And the Manulife insurance, they were late into the game. So they were pestering me to get the Canada Pension Plan, and I already had it. But Manulife, or Sun Life, was already taken into account. So I figured it was none of their business. Now, they were pestering me so much, I finally said to the guy, listen here, buddy. I said, listen, don't bother me about applying for the Canada Pension Plan disability. I've already got it. I said, I was pestered by Sun Life to get it. And you know what? They're taking into account ever since March of 2014. And here we are in 2015. So the early bird gets the worm. So go fuck yourself. You can't take it into account too. Sun Life beat you to it. They took it into account anyway. So I lost it off of 2 pensions. I lost it off of 2 insurances. Now that affects my current year payment. Okay. So that's the money you get right now. So because of the Canada Pension Plan, I got about $1,000 a month. It was $1,017.94. Now, they deducted from my 2 insurances and my 2 pensions, they deducted $2,650. So $2,650, take away $1,000, I'm down $1,150 a month. Now, that's on an ongoing basis going forward. But because of my retroactive Canada Pension Plan disability, I ended up owing $25,000 because Sun Life wanted their money from my retroactive that came directly to me when I didn't sign the irrevocable consent. Manulife said, even today, I have letters from them saying, you still owe us $15,000. And my Public Service Superannuation Act pension, because of bridging, sent me a bill for $9,800, and the Reserve First Pension Plan sent me a $909 bill. So that's the arrears. So you have a current year problem where you lose money going forward, and you have an arrears problem because the retroactive causes what they call overpayments, and then unless you cut them a check to pay them directly the full amount right away, they reduce your payment for your current year. Additionally, besides the current year payment you lose because you got the Canada Pension Plan, because of the arrears, the retroactive, they say, oh, well, we're going to take $130 off for the next 10 years, and therefore, you'll retire this debt. Now, go fuck yourself. My Canada Pension Plan ought to be protected by Canada Pension Plan Act Section 65(1) and Financial Administration Act Section 67, and by the spirit and intent of the Canada Pension Plan, which I know from the Hansard on the 9th of November, 1964, when a Mr. Chatterton said to the, I might have that picture there so I don't have to just guess at what they said, but basically the Minister of Health and Welfare was a Judy LaMarche, and she was a Liberal, not that it mattered, I suppose, and he said, so, the civil servant would get that. Okay, I should go up a bit more, yes. Okay. Mr. Chatterton, if he worked for 5 years only, would his pension be his pension would be $52, would it not? She said, would the honorable member look at page 40 of the bill, line 21, subsection 3B. You divide by 60. For this purpose, the 10-year transition is not taken into account. And they had special rules at the beginning because nobody would have had the contributions to get the Canada Pension Plan at the beginning, because you got to pay into the plan for 47 years to get the maximum. So for the first 10 years, they had special rules to give people a break. Now, so Mr. Chatterton then goes on and says, so the civil servant will get that, even though he will get a pension under the Civil Service Act also. He would get his disability pension under the Public Service Superannuation Act as well as the pension under the Canada Pension Plan. He was looking for an answer that no, we'll claw some of that back, or he'll only get one pension. The minister, who was a lawyer, I believe, answered quite correctly, yes, just like anyone else. So they're saying that the public service pensions, the Canadian Forces pension, the RCMP pensions are no different than any other pension plan. They're property. If he happens to have 5 or 6 other private plans, he gets those too. Now, I'll mention this because it just jumped out at me. She talked about other private pension plans. The Canadian Forces, RCMP, and the Public Service Superannuation Act pensions are not public pensions. They're private pensions. You might say, how are they private? They're paid for by the government. They're not paid for by the government. They're paid for by the person who contributes the money, which is the employee. And the contributions are held by the government, yes, but they're supposed to be held in trust for the person who they're banking the money for. So when I was saying earlier that the Income Tax Act regulations say that the pensions can only be paid to the person who contributed to it, the person who is the pensioner, that is registered pension plan regulations. So in order to qualify for a deduction under the Income Tax Act, a registered pension plan must follow the rules set out in the Income Tax Act regulations. So the fact is, at least the way I read it, bridging violates the Income Tax Act regulations. Plus, the Canada Pension Plan disability pension being sent directly to an insurance company with those direct payments I was talking about, if I had signed the irrevocable consent, that also violates the registered pension plan regulations of the Income Tax Act. Because in the common law, because the common law is the one which covers pensions and stuff, because it's contract and trust law generally, and those are provincial under Section 9213 of the Constitution Act. Well, the thing is, the federal government can't decide what to do, because basically it's a provincial matter exclusively. Now, I didn't put the picture here, but as I'm talking about it, I came across a Hansard report that said, basically, the federal government can make pension law as long as it doesn't offend provincial law. So as long as they follow the same rules that the provinces do, there's nothing wrong with them making the Public Service, RCMP, and the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. But where they go wrong is if they decide to allow bridging, for example. Well, you're not allowed to deduct one pension from another pension because they're not the same. Different contributors, different acts, different contribution rates, different rules about disability, different rules. It's just insane how bad this bridging is. But for the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, it's even worse, because under Section 2 of the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, they define disability as being unable to do your own trade. That's a 3B definition. But the Canada Pension Plan disability is only 3A definition. So unless a soldier is medically released under release item 3A, then bridging should not be allowed. Do you follow me? They're not the same. It's not apples and oranges. It's not apples and apples. It's apples and oranges. The Canada Pension Plan disability is only for people who can't do any job after work. Now, I am getting tired of this, so I'll mention one other thing. One of the reasons I thought of that might explain, even though it's not really a reason, because Miss LaMarche, Minister LaMarche, she stated the reason that if you got them, you get them anyway. But if you wanted to justify it in today's, cost savvy people are worried about the cost of things, and they think their taxes might go down because we get such good pensions. Well, in the Salts British Columbia Court of Appeal 2006 case, there was the government of British Columbia had to pay damages to an RCMP member who they had contracted all the RCMP had got federal government to provide police services in BC, and one of the RCMP members harassed the other person so much that she became disabled. She sued, not the feds, because she wouldn't be allowed to. Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act, Section 9, would have thrown the case out because she was getting a Pension Act pension for the disability. However, she sued the province of BC in, I think, what's a novel approach, and she won. She got $900 and something thousand in damages. Now, she was getting the RCMP Superannuation Act, the Canada Pension Plan Disability, the Great West Life policy, like CFSA. Then she got the damages in tort for the harm that she suffered at the hands of an abusive superior. And then she was getting the Pension Act pension for the abuse from the superior. So the judge decided to take into account the Pension Act and convert it from a monthly pension into an amount for damages to be reduced. Now, people might say, what about the Dennis Manuge case? Well, that was a year later it got started, and 6 years later before it finished, and it got it wrong. The Dennis Manuge class action, they said that the Pension Act was a non-indemnity payment, which means it's not compensating for anything. When it does compensate for something, it compensates for the inability to work after military service. So in theory, the judge was perfectly acceptable to deduct the pension from the damages. And they did. But what I said to the lawyer, Barry somebody, I called him up. I get nosy like that and I butt in. I said, listen, do you want your client to possibly get her money back from, the province of BC mitigating their damages by the Pension Act? So what are you talking about? I said, well, Pension Act Section 30 says that no one can intercept the Pension Act pension in law or equity. Now, this was a court of law, and the judge said that the Pension Act could be taken into account, but he can't. He's a Canadian citizen. He's bound by the Pension Act. He's bound by Section 30 of the Pension Act. So, we would have had, possibly, the judge might have had to make his mind up which one would get to take into account with the other. He could have said, instead of saying the province of BC could take it into account, he said, listen, the federal government, by virtue of Section 25 of the Pension Act, because this lady is getting a pension and damages for the same event, then we're going to convert the damages into a monthly payment and allow Veterans Affairs Canada to deduct that amount from their payment to her, because you're not supposed to get overcompensated for the same injury. Now, that's a very good principle. It's called the compensation principle. Now, the compensation principle looks good on paper, but how often does a person who gets injured get overcompensated? Now, the province of BC, they argued that the RCMP Superannuation Act was compensation, and therefore, to get the damages plus the RCMP Superannuation Act would overcompensate the victim, and therefore it wouldn't be fair. Now, seeing I brought it up, I might as well mention the other parts. They said the Great West Life long-term disability, which is almost the exact same thing as the CFSA policy, is a non-indemnity and contributory insurance, and it has always been the case that those are not deducted from damages. They said the Canada Pension Plan Disability is also a non-indemnity and contributory payment, and according to the Sarvanis Supreme Court of Canada case in 2002, it cannot be used to mitigate damages for the person who harmed the victim. And they compared those two to the Canadian Forces the RCMP Superannuation Act, and they said this was also non-indemnity and contributory, and therefore you can't use a person's property to take it into account to help the person who hurt the victim. Perfectly reasonable. Now, I keep getting distracted and going off on a tangent. Might not seem that way, but I'm looking at a picture from the case, and I wanted to read off the red box. Now, I'm going to read this red box off, maybe make a comment or two, and then I'm going to shut up and turn this off. Paragraph 53. The superannuation pension is a pension that the plaintiff contributed to, exactly what I've been saying, they put money away and put it in the bank, and is entitled to as a result of her years of service with the RCMP. The fact is that if she had worked for 35 years, she would have contributed more to her pension, and it would have been much larger. She also contributed to the Great West Life Insurance Disability Insurance Plan. Payments received, some of these sources are collateral benefits. Now, that's a term you see in lawsuits about damages wanting to take insurance being taken into account, and they say they can't because they're collateral benefits. They're not related to the injury. So, and they should not be taken into account when calculating her past and future wage losses. A tortfeasor should not receive the benefit of the plaintiff's foresight in contributing to insurance and pension plans. This is the exact same thing we can tell VAC. They should not benefit by clawing back our pensions and insurance. Thus, the monies paid and payable under the Veterans Affairs pension are the only monies that should be deducted from the plaintiff's wage loss claim. Now, this is where I say they're wrong. I mean, judges are human too, so they can't know all the rules, but they ought to know, because of the Statutory Instruments Act, about Pension Act Section 30 and Financial Administration Act Section 67, and they might possibly know about the Beattie v. Lavasora Ontario Superior Court case in 1995. And all federal crown debts that are being paid to someone, they have legal protection on them. Every one of them. Sometimes they make a small exception in specific cases. Like Canadian Forces Superannuation Act Section 83 says nobody can touch the pension, except in the case of the Garnishment, Attachment, and Pension Benefit Division Act and the Pension Benefit Diversion Act. So there are two legal federal law exceptions to that prohibition. Notice that they didn't put the Service Income Support Insurance Plan there. So when they put, or Veterans Affairs Canada, so when Veterans Affairs or the Department of National Defence under the CFSA policy takes the Canadian Forces pension into account, they're breaking federal law. There's no exception to that prohibition against people taking the money, indirectly or directly. Directly will be taking it after going and getting a court order, going to get the money after government directly. Indirectly is like what happened in the Manuge case, where they ask you how much you're getting, and then they reduce your payment. They avoid going to court. Now, all of that, and I got kind of off track again. Here's what I meant to tell you. If you get, I'll use my case, 21 years service with the federal government, 13 years service in the military. So when I get my Canada Pension Plan disability, I missed out on 26 years because you had to have 47 years in order to get the maximum Canada Pension Plan disability, Canada Pension Plan retirement pension. Now, in the case of the Public Service Superannuation Act, to retire without an actuarial penalty, you know, you're healthy, you want to retire, live life, you know, get some retirement pension, but not wait until you're too disabled to enjoy it. You have to have the magic number of 85 between years of service and age. So it could be 55 with 30 years of service, that adds up 85, and then you can get out without a penalty. If you decide that you want to get out before that, you have to pay a 5% per year that you missed that number by. See? So they penalize you to make you wait. Now, because of my 21 years of service, I got a 42% pension, 2% per year accrual rate. But had I worked to 35 years, I would have got a 70% pension. Now, this is what the judge meant, that she was harmed financially because of the abuse. Because the abuse, the harassment was so bad, she became disabled and unable to contribute. Therefore, she got a lower Canada Pension Plan. She got a lower RCMP Superannuation Act pension. Now, I could make the argument, even though I don't need to because we have the Hansard from 1964, but I could say that it is in the public interest to allow the Canada Pension Plan Disability and the Public Service RCMP and the Canadian Forces and the Reserve Force Pension Plan Disability pensions. Because the person who is injured and unable to contribute to the pension anymore, they ought to get both, because they're going to get a lower pension than a person who's healthy and gets out and gets a normal pension. Isn't that common sense? Because what they're doing is evil. They're taking a pension that's reduced because if a person's over in Kandahar, the Canadian Forces serving the government of Canada, they get blown up by an IED and then their career is cut short. And therefore, if they apply for the Canada Pension Plan and the Canadian Forces pension, they get a reduced Canadian Forces and the Canada Pension Plan disability pension because they got blown up. Now, if they get blown up and they have to get a reduced pension, why should you harm them more by taking into account the reduced Canada Pension Plan disability and then take that into account as bridging under a reduced fucking Canadian Forces pension? This is evil. Nothing short of evil, okay? Instead of looking at this and saying, look, we got to do it because it's the law. I said to somebody, it might have been the member of Parliament, Charles Rogers, because I was talking to his staffer about he's a member of the Incompetent Veterans Affairs Committee, Newfoundland MP. So I was telling him about some of these problems. And I was saying, public policy, they should put out a public policy. Anybody injured in Canadian military service will get a maximum Canada Pension Plan, will get a maximum Canadian Forces pension, and they won't claw back anything from anything because they would have been able to contribute to their pensions, just like in this case I just mentioned, but they got their career cut short by the fact that they were risking life and limb for Canada. I think that's a very good public policy suggestion. I bet you $1 million that there will be people that would say, that's too generous. Giving them both pensions like that without any clawback and a maximum at that? Oh my God, are you insane? Well, no, I'm not. If you want to recruit and retain soldiers to defend Canada, you had to be prepared to make sacrifices. Like the soldiers prepared to die or get disabled, then Canada should be willing to take a financial sacrifice and offer an incentive to join the military. Because right now, bridging harms recruitment and retention, which is one of my main points. If I ever get to the point where somebody listens, I'm going to say, on a public policy perspective, according to the Roy Federal Court of Appeal case in 2003, the Canadian Forces pension is both a forced savings plan and an attraction for people to join and stay in the military. Okay, so if it's supposed to help people stay and join the military in the first place and then stay when they get in the military, what effect does bridging have on it? It's going to have a negative effect. You don't have to have a study. You pay into two pensions, you only get one and a bit. So you get probably 1.5 instead of 2. Now, do they tell people that when they sign up? Do they also tell, hey, listen, thanks for joining up, but if you get disabled, we're going to take your Canada Pension Plan into account. We're going to reduce your Veterans Affairs Income Replacement Benefit. We're going to reduce your Service Income Support Insurance Plan. We're going to reduce your Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension. And then, would they still join the Canadian military? I don't know. But these are the tough questions that someone should ask these son of a bitches. Because they're applying the rules and trying to expect us, and I knew I'd work it in sooner or later when I was thinking about it in my head what I talk about today. I think they're counting on indoctrination, okay? Remember I said I read criminal cases and stuff? Court-martials is one of the things I've read too. One of the purposes of court-martials and other military discipline is to ensure instant obedience to orders. Okay? None of this I'm going to argue with you. You have to obey orders instantly. Well, they indoctrinate soldiers to obey orders instantly, and then you come along and have bridging or the Pension Act clawback. Are those people who have been indoctrinated into the system to believe that the government is right and you have to obey orders, and they're getting an order from the administrator of the pension or the insurance, and they're saying this is just the way the rules work? Well, the instant obedience to orders that was drilled into us is now working against us, because if you're not in the military any longer, you don't have to have unlimited liability. You don't have to risk your life and limb for the country anymore. You're out. You're not subject to orders. But you have them drilled into you by constant repetition. That's why it's called drills. Listen, on that note, talking about an hour, and I'll see about being back again next week, and hopefully I'll have a more normal broadcast instead of going through this and doing an ad hoc one, reading off that letter and talking about my Canadian Forces Ombudsman thing. Although it's still probably interesting, possibly, besides me just here talking. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.